Okay, well, I'll have my fancy title, but given today is Valentine's Day, we're going to talk about a love story between two. We're going to personify JSON-LD and RDFa, and we're going to talk about a love story of SOL formats for semantics. And there is, some good rationale for this. These things operate in the same space as semantics on the web. How do we convey semantics? How do we annotate information? Exchange that. They were developed by some of the same people, right? Literally people on the same working groups at the same time doing two different syntaxes for the same kinds of things. So that's interesting. And of course, JSON-LD is very attractive to being JSON-based to JavaScript developers, and there's a lot of those in the world, right? And there's a lot of HTML markup. So RDFa is very attractive for that. See if people are actually interested in that. And so there's been some little bit of debate like, oh, we should just use JSON-LD and forget about RDFa, et cetera. And I think we just need to all get along. And I think we can do that, and so can these formats, right? So we're going to play relationship counselor here for these two data formats that are SOL formats. All right, so let's talk about a very simple problem. I have my personal information. There is the schema.org structures for a person and an organization that they might belong to and how we describe that information. So I have my contact information. I'm at the School of Information at Berkeley. And over here on the right, we have a bunch of triples. This is in turtle syntax. So this is the semantic graph that we would like to have. It starts at the top, and we have schema.org, and we have some URI that represents me, and it's a person. And we have some facets about me, or basically properties, or if you want to call them predicates, right? Name, email, organization. There's some things that have values, and some things that point to other things, right? So organization points off to this blank node thingy. It could be a real URI, but in this case it's not. And that's an organization, and that is Berkeley itself, and I belong to a particular department. Oh, look at that, a pointer. Does this pointer actually work? Oh, look, you can not see it, I bet. Anyway, that's all right. And in that organization, the school has a department, and that's the school information. So it's a nice little sort of hierarchical thing. We would like people to explore the web and find this kind of information. It's also in pink. So maybe you know something about RDFa, maybe you don't. But this big blob of HTML, you see HTML blobs all the time, has some RDFa in it. And basically, it's a top-down type of structure, and we add in some special attributes. That's the A in RDFa, is for attributes. And we annotate the information. So at the very top, I'm saying I'm using the schema.org vocabulary, and I say that, well, I have this resource, which is me, and it's a type person. And again, because we have a somewhat hierarchical structure of markup, I can start talking about properties of that new subject that I established here. I have a URI, which is my website, and I have the organization, type of organization, and so forth, so I can do that. But, adding attributes to qualify information is a very normal thing to do in HTML. We love that. Great. But there's times where the algorithm for RDFa just kind of goes awry, right? There was a choice. When we find new things, new possible subjects, like the website, that's a new thing. We can go left or right. Left is, it's a new subject. We have a new context. We have properties about that subject. Or right, no, it's just a piece of information. They chose left. So what happens is then if you have things that you are sub-properties of the other subject, right? We have two subjects in play here. You're out of luck, right? RDFa has done the wrong thing. So that's what's happening here. I have my name. I want to make a nice link to my HTML, and I have my name, and I'd like that name to be not duplicated elsewhere, and I would like it to be associated with the resource here, and not the URI of my website. I have a problem. RDFa is not listening to me. The subject is changing the subject on me. I don't like this. This is not good, right? Oh, and then I have a very short, obviously, screensaver thingy. So it's a great time to take a break. Settings, and here you saver, and yes, we can do that too. I mean, maybe I'm not quite loud enough. All right. Is that better?
No, no.
No? Oh, okay, there we go. Better? Better.
Is that better?
All right. No?
No.
It's gotta be, even, it's gonna be super close.
Yeah.
All right.
Mohammed, find the speed button and turn that down.
I will talk very slowly for you, Norm.
Thank you.
All right, so as I probably should have highlighted some of this. So the real problem here is that there's a top-down, left-to-right algorithm here, and when we discover new subjects, they're not always the subject that we want for the properties contained within, right? So that's a real problem. And another real problem with RDFA is that the things that you do in your markup are not always the things that you want in your triple graph, right? You're designing a web page. You have some content in there for that purpose. It relates to things that are in that you want in that triple graph, but it's not exactly the right thing. And so you have this issue of saying, well, I have an email and the href is a mail to thing, but in fact the content is just the email alone. RDFA is not very cognizant of that, right? So then you have to start repeating information, and we don't like this. I do not like I don't want to have to repeat myself to RDFA. It's not very nice of it as an individual, right? And so we end up with this sort of awkward insertions of additional stuff to make sure that the graph comes out correct, right? So this is not good. It's nice that we can not duplicate information when it's convenient, but it's bad that we have to change our markup to accommodate the algorithm and choices of the algorithm. So even though RDFA likes to collaborate, it's not really always listening to what I would like it to. Well, okay, so then there's JSON-LD. And if you're a JavaScript person, this looks really awesome. It's just, there's some weird @ signs in here, but otherwise it's like, it's a nice piece of JSON, and I can poke at that, and I can get some information. I don't even have to turn it into triples. Awesome, right? So it's compact, it's easy to understand, free-flowing. It's great. But a bunch of that information was in my HTML document, right? So now I'm always having to repeat myself, and I'm always having to duplicate information. And it's just kind of sitting there all by itself. Sort of self-absorbed. I'm JSON-LD man, just pay attention to me. Not concerned about other information resources. We're doing our own thing. All right? So it lacks hypertext, right? There is a URI there, but you have to go and process the RDFA to know that that's a link. Right? You could make some assumptions, but you really actually have to load this thing at the top. Right? That's the context. It says schema.org, and that tells you what these properties are. And if you go process that context, it'll give you information that says, when I get to things of type organization, that URL is a property that's a URI, and et cetera. There's a schema defined for that, to some extent, if you want to call it a schema. So that's a problem. But it does easily represent information that is not always necessarily normally contained in the markup that I might have on a particular page about a particular resource or person or thing. So I can use this as a way to convey additional information. And that's, I think people who are trying to exchange information, they like the idea of JSON-LD. They like the ability, I can put this in my web API, I can send it back and forth. That's good. Well, so here's my sole formats thing. They complement each other really quite nicely. All right, so they both describe a graph of triples. Right? We have subjects and predicates and objects, and we have ways to convey them in RDFA, and we have ways to convey them in JSON-LD. They are making assertions about the same subjects. Right? RDFA is nicely located on elements. So if we have elements and we have information there, we can easily, potentially at least, annotate it, and it's rooted in hypertext. Right? Links are there to be made use of. JSON-LD is nice and compact. Right? We can easily just represent our triples without having to worry too much about whether this is going to affect the way my web page looks or something like that. What I do to my markup. I'm not trying to do unnatural acts to it. So the thing is that if we look at them as a collective whole, right, the union of these two formats is a union of their triple graphs. They are making assertions about the same resources, the same web resources, the same hypertext, and they're all doing it in context, right? So we can sort of take this together as one sort of yin and yang kind of moment. Now, anybody who's been around me for a long time has seen this at the foot of my email. And some of you have even asked me, what the heck does this mean? And it was literally in a footnote of this book that I was reading. And you can ask me later why I was reading that book. But it's actually really pertinent to this, which is the fact that, choices of syntax, of grammar, of intention, affect how we organize information. And so, they're not independent. And that's, of course, what Burton Russell was talking about mathematics and developing formal systems for describing them failed. But part of this, I think, is this realization that, we can't always describe everything we want to. So what we want to try and do, though, given that achieving the perfect thing is impossible, is pick representations, right? The right representation for the right kind of information, and not do unnatural acts to our data. Use the right format for the information being represented. You don't have to check just JSON-LD, and we don't have to pick just RDFA. It doesn't have to just be XML, and it doesn't have to just be HTML, right? We can use these things in conjunction with all the formats that are available to us. And then we have semantics rolled in there as well. So, we have our two sole formats. They're not getting along necessarily. They're kind of in their separate corners, pouting. How do we bring these back together? Well, one unifying thing is the backdrop of the web, and whether I like it or not, I kind of like it. HTML is there. It is the thing that unifies. When we go to a web page, we hit that HTML page first. So, we can use the fact that there's hypertext, that there's HTML, and there's markup there, and we can use RDFA in that context to identify things, right? This element here, this paragraph, this thing has my name in it, and that's I'm a person, right? May have an identifier associated with me that I've chosen, or somebody has chosen for me. So we can use RDFA to annotate that information in the context of the markup, but we're not going to stop at the point where we start doing unnatural things to our information, where the choice of syntax, RDFA, and its algorithm starts making us do bad things. Right? And then at that point that we stop, we're going to use JSON-LD, attempting to avoid duplication information. Right? This is a non-perfect world. And we're going to rely on JSON-LD to convey the rest. Right? And that's the remaining information will go into JSON-LD as a syntax. And there's a way to embed that into HTML. So this is our sort of environment that we're living in. It's the context of the web with these two data formats. So that's the strategy. All right. Now, at the risk of making your eyes glaze over, here's a solution to the previous problem. So we go back a couple of slides, right? And we had this for RDFA, eyes glazing over, markup. This is all these examples are in the papers. If you would like to see this up close, you can go look at that. But it's some blob of HTML with some attributes in it, and they identify things like emails and URIs and what have you, but there's some unnatural acts in that. And then there's JSON-LD, and that's nice, but it's not any information that's going to be displayed on a page. That's nice from a JSON perspective, but it's duplicating information. So in the middle, slightly less blobby HTML, slightly less verbose JSON-LD. And what you can't see up here is the bold. It's not even showing up at all. Interesting, it's washed out. Let's make this bigger. All right, let's do it like that. All right, so we've sort of decluttered this, right? We have said that, we're still using, this is a simplified version of what I had before, but we're still using schema.org, so somewhere in my document I've declared the vocabulary I'm using. That's RDFA syntax. That's the very top. And I still have my resource being identified, identify me of type person. And my name is then this thing, and this is, if this were to render, it would say, I work at the University of California, Berkeley, at the School of Information. It's just going to be a paragraph. You're not going to see all this stuff, right? But the name has been picked out. The organization, Berkeley, type of organization has been picked out. The name of that organization has been picked out. The resource for the iSchool is there, of type organization, property department of this guy. All of that has been added to the triple graph. But they're not associated with it. At this point, there are two independent subjects, right? And there's a few properties been associated about them, and the fact that I work at that place has not been asserted, right? It's not in this. Now, but we can fix that. Way down here at the bottom. Again, I have to tell it that I'm using schema.org. But here's a resource, me, and I've given it some additional information, right? So I've parsed my name for you. You now know you now know something new about me. If you didn't know that before, Alex is not my first name, all right? And you now know my website, which is not on that page, and you know my email address, which is not on that page. And you also know that I work at the University of California, Berkeley. Right? That's where, or at least that's the organization I belong to. So I've now connected those two resources together, right? And I haven't said anything else about the University of California, Berkeley, because that's all in the RDFA. Right? I didn't have to do something strange. So I've augmented that information. And you'll notice that I have this in a script tag. Right? That's totally cool with HTML. It's the way that JSON-LD is embedded into a web page. So I can go to this page now, and I can process the two semantic web annotation bits of data, right? And I could treat them as separate things, or I could treat them as the union of that. And if we do treat them as a union, now we've brought these two formats together, making the same assertions that we had earlier, except that they were independent, right? And we're using the right data format, right? One is compact for things that don't fit my web page. One is directly related to the things that I've already put on my page, and I'm not duplicating information. And I'm making relationships between things without having to attempt to contain them and wrap them, and like I would have to put the organization Berkeley underneath the subject of me, or make some other crazy assertion in this page to tie these things together. And instead, over here, I just make a simple little, if you can see that, a simple little object here that says, hey, the organization is this guy. This is Berkeley. We're done. Right? I don't have to do unnatural acts to my markup. And that's great. I've done a lot of RDFA recently, and trying to pack in triples is really hard. So having an alternate way to just say, and here's some more stuff, is good. Well, so that's, kind of a contrived example, right? Persons, organizations, it's everybody's favorite thing. So let's talk about a slightly more interesting demo. I have lots of media. So do you, right? I went and downloaded my whole archive of Facebook, of all of these objects in there and data that they've given me about all of the things I've posted on Facebook for the last, I don't know how many years, almost 8, 9 years, something like that. And so, I'd like to take that information and expose it as a media archive, and I would like to have it annotated. And so I have subject resources, I have images, and I have information about them, and I have comment streams, and I have geolocations, and I have all kinds of stuff. There could be annotations in that media. And so what I want is some kind of minimal markup that lets me represent this archive. I would like to use some RDFA in there to identify the subjects. Simple links to JSON-LD. There's an even simpler way to link to JSON-LD, which is you can put it in its own little file. So we're going to do that. And then the result is that I have data that's indexable, right? It is something that a aware search engine that's aware of these formats can go and they can discover these resources. They can process the RDFA. This is what the Googles of the world want us to do with schema.org, is they want us to put out information that they can then look at the curated information that you're giving them, all this stuff that you put into the schema.org vocabulary about that resource, about you, about that picture, whatever it is, And so this is all indexable. This is great. Now, I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. Right? And I won't want cruft. I want this to be the simplest thing possible so that it's all compartmentalized and I don't have to worry about syntaxes changing and the rug being pulled out from under you. Or at least that's pushed into a corner. Right. So that looks like this. The markup. Simple. Right? This is all I have to do for my image gallery. I'm going to, literally, there's a schema.org type called image gallery. Right? And I have a bunch of photographs, and I'm just going to link to them. That's it. We're done with the markup. No more RDFA. Right? What did this do? Well, at the top here, there's a blank node, and it has a type of image gallery, and that's about all we know about that. And for each of these image tags, this source attribute is picked up as a new subject, right? And I could make a relationship between them. I should have, actually. There's a relationship between image gallery and the things in it, right? I haven't done there. It's missing on the slide. But that subject, this is what Facebook does to your pictures, by the way. It turns them into this big, long number. No idea what that means. Each of these resources of type photograph. Right? So I can go now and look at this page and find elements in there that have information associated with them as photographs versus anything else that I might have, an icon on the page, a picture of me in the corner from my Twitter feed. Who knows? Right, so that's step one. We do something elegant with RDFA and stop. Now, I have information that Facebook has given me about each of those images. So somewhere in my document, probably in the head, I link off to this thing, and I use the source attribute. I don't want to embed this. And you can do that as well, right? I can link off to this thing. It's hypertext. Or you can do this. I don't have to embed the JSON. So I link off to this, the JSON-LD. This is generated from the data that I get from Facebook. Right? I'll show you that in a minute. All right, so that's it. I put that into my web page. Right? Well, now we have additional information, but we have to put something there. Right? What is that something? Well, it's the additional detail. Now, I get kind of minimal information without processing the comment streams. But at the top, I have some admin, right? What's the context schema.org? What's the URI of the thing I'm talking about, right? And then the type that is a photograph. So I have to repeat sort of the basics to identify that it's the subject. Actually, I don't even have to, the type could be deleted. I don't actually have to have that there. So that's additional information, but maybe it's kind of nice. And then I have, the date created, I have a description, like location of where this thing was taken, and potentially a comment. So some of this stuff is things I get directly from things like Facebook, and some of these things I've added, like I added the comment. This is an annotation, right? I'm going to show you what that means in a second, but the description is something I have on the page. But it also gave me the geo coordinates. So is this thing really working? Is it dead? Are we dead? No, we're working now. So here we have geo-type coordinates and the latitude and longitude. That's great. And so we have a content location that's a place, and then we have this geo facet, which is of geo-coordinates, and then there's a pair of things. That's where the picture was taken. We know when, where, and then I have a comment here. Well, there's a picture of a crane in here, actually. And so I know inside the image where that is, and then where I have an annotation box for that. And that comment is something that actually exists in schema.org as well. So I can do this. The box is maybe a little contrived. Still need to add. Those are extensions that I've added. All right? So that's all I had to do. Right? Now I could make this arbitrarily more complex. I could add a bunch of more annotations here, more comments, more things about that image. There's all kinds of things I could do to this to add that additional information. But, right, this page, this part of the page, this part of the page doesn't change. Right? Right, so that's, well, I would like to have a demo. I see that it's decided to, the map here is decided. So this is literally embedded in this slide deck, which is HTML. That same markup is in there. And there's a piece of code, JavaScript code, that goes in and processes the RDFA and JSON and builds the graph. That's my green turtle stuff. You may have saw that last year and the year before about this. This is a new way of looking at this. Same stuff with JSON-LD added. Right? So there's a union of the graph here that it's operating on. And this content here on the side is all generated. User interface is all generated from those links from the RDFA graph. Right? So we have the picture of the crane. We have some metadata about it. We have a leaflet map here of where it is. Right? This is in the North Bay, just above San Francisco. There's a very pixelated picture of a crane. There's a crane right here in the middle. Right? And we can actually highlight the annotation. So all of this is extracted from the graph and then used by the user interface to generate a way of looking at this. And we can go cycle through this, which is what you would expect. Right, here's some more pretty pictures of China Camp. Interesting water. Right, it's all of this stuff is being taken out of the graph and used to generate information about this image gallery. Right, so we get what we want from a sort of selfish standpoint. We have a user interface, nice image gallery. We have information about it. We have annotations. I can add annotations, right? So I actually did this for fun. Here's a picture of a tree. Oops, let's see, it's off by a little bit. And that's actually generated a little RDFA, a little JSON-LD thing I'll show you in a moment. So I can certainly add information in here. And the sort of clean version of this, let's go to the clean version, not embedded in my slides, does the same thing. But let's look at, I've got to show this page source, man. That's like the quintessential. It's not smoke and mirrors. All right? That's it. That's the only markup I have to generate, right? I have type, let me make that bigger. Oops, that's the wrong one. Oh, come on. You can do this. No, you're not doing it. Good, Chrome will do this, but then Chrome won't work. Nice, thank you, Apple. Well, it's a little small for you, but type of, here's my images, there's the links to the data. That's a pretty easy thing to generate. There's some cruft at the top here in terms of, there's RDFA, there's the media gallery thing, it's CSS, and then this is leaflet thing generates the map. So that's really minimal intrusion into this. You could use some better bootstrapping mechanisms to even minimize that. And then, if we annotate something, let's do that a couple more times so you can see it. Right? I can generate new information through this user interface. So here's a new comment. I could have asked you for what we should type in here, but it's just a chunk of JSON-LD, right? And so I can throw that into the web page. I can send it to my repository and add it, merge it with the information already known. I could have it as a separate thing, a separate web resource of information I generated today. I have lots of choices in terms of that as a information resource that's making assertions about this image right here. And that's one of the sort of beautiful things about using JSON-LD as a sort of this external way to represent triples. All right? So, I have no idea what time it is. But let's go back here. And that's actually where we end. And it's not that bad. We've gotten them back together. A little bit of help from HTML, but JSON-LD, RDFA, they work fantastic together. And then you get this wonderful larger graph. And you can go from that graph back into the document and find things and then do useful work with that information. Or you can index it and throw it up in search results if that's for Google. But for me, I want the web page in the browser to do something useful. All right, so that's it. time for questions.
Thank you, Alex. So, any questions? Yeah.
Felix Sasaki at WC and DFK. I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I want to, well, maybe even strongly question one of the assumptions you make. You're saying that RDFa is for identifying items in hypertext. And I want to really question that assumption. Because what you do when you have RDFa in markup is that you embed RDF triples in the markup. But that does not mean that really the RDF triples are related to the markup. Let me give you an example. Assume one web page where this sentence, Alex gave a presentation at XMLPrague, Felix is making a comment. Imagine that's in one P element. Of course, you can use RDFa to annotate Alex as with RDFa as a person with a unique identifier. You can annotate Felix as a unique identifier, of both pointing to the URIs which identify us. What you get from that is two independent triples, which say, okay, I make a statement about Alex, I made a statement about Felix. You don't get this aspect that they are mentioned in the same P element. And you don't get really the anchoring in the hypertext. Is this an issue? Well, for the examples you gave here, this is no issue. I think that's totally fine. But also for the scenario of search engine optimization, that's no issue. But what you don't really do is anchoring in this context, which may be an issue for more enhanced, what we may call data or text analytics. So give me all pages in which the entities of Alex and Felix are mentioned in the same context. You won't get that through your triples. Of course, you could annotate that explicitly using RDFa, but then you would end up annotating basically the markup structure, well, replicating the markup structure with triples, which would create a huge overhead. Nobody would want that. One reason why I'm saying that also because of a painful experience. When we created the ITS, the Internationalization text set, the first thought of using RDFa exactly for this topic, for this purpose of making statements about items or entities in hypertext, in context in hypertext. And we, at the end, were asked by the RDF data working group to recharter, to put RDFa for this purpose out of our charter and have a different mechanism, because it does not give you the context. So again, not again against the use cases you're saying, but against the statement that you get really embedding in the hypertext context. I think that's not the case.
Okay.
Okay.
Comment taken, apparently. Any other comments or questions? Oh, yeah, Jim.
Oh, I've lost my screen now. For some reason.
Thank you. Jim Fuller, MarkLogic. Alex, I have two observations, or one observation. One is Jenny Tennyson, where you're standing, talked, I think, in 2012 about chimeras. Is this a chimera? Are you mashing two technologies together and to get somewhere interesting? And then the second, sort of not at all related, but couldn't you just inject one script element with all instead of multiple script elements?
Yeah, I can slice and dice the JSON however I want. I happen to have generated these things for each image, so I thought of it as a web service where there's a resource and there's information about the resource, and so I have independently linked, but I certainly should have gotten a giant blob of JSON too, and it would work just fine. Chimeras, one of the consequences of using both JSON and RDFa is a lot of blank notes. We can make assertions and triples about things that don't have names. And I have a type object here, you know, a subject that doesn't have a name. It's an image gallery. It just exists on this web page. It's the only place it exists in the world. It doesn't have a name. You have to go here to get this subject. And the same thing goes, I mean, these resources, you know, to some extent, they have a name, right? They're out there there's a picture that I took, and it's a piece of, it's bits somewhere, and I stored it on the web, and it has a URI for it. But the association of that your resource to that image gallery only happens on this web page, right? It's the only place you can find it. It's the only way you can extract that information. You know, these things, the link between that blob of JSON to that image gallery, only happens on this web page, right? Hypertext is the unifying thing that lets me go and find that I've made this collection of resources that you can now process. And you know, from a purely selfish standpoint, you know, it turns into this, which I could do, admittedly, a better job if I was a better UI designer, but I'm not. But it turns into this, you know, and I have then used these technologies to bring in some semantics, some annotations, to make things happen on this web page. And so I don't care, actually, that whether or not Google can get information from this, although I happen to be making their job easier, right? They know, if I get the right image up, if I did this right, you know, they know there's a picture of a crane on this page. I could give them an identifier and an annotation that points off to iNaturalist that points off to the proper annotation for this thing and identification of this as a species, if I knew which kind of crane that was. So I could do that. And then they'd have that information too. But again, I don't care that Google gets it. I care that I can use these technologies to make this web page do exactly what I want. It's very selfish. It's the way the great technology started, is to be selfish about what I'm going to do with this thing, you know, how this annotation is going to make my life easier, right? And then it'll make your life easier, and it'll maybe make Google's life easier, you know, maybe. And so, you know, I'm only on the fence here in terms of, like, you know, this sort of magical world of RDF where, you know, all of these things happen and we have this massive universe of triples. I'm kind of on the edge of, like, can I believe that? Or can I just make it do some useful work? So I'd rather make it do some useful work, personally. That's where I've been focused for years. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I think I understand it. They're complementary instead of mashing them together. Yeah. They are complementary, yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alex.
All right.
Thank you very much.